In today's episode, a retired couple from Florida hit the beach for their daily morning swim. As they jump off the jetty, the couple unknowingly land just inches from a massive tiger shark. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying tiger shark attack on Thadius Kubinski. Welcome to Final Affliction. Thadius and Anna Kubinski had lived in Boca Ciega Bay since 1984. Thadius's job at a large manufacturing company and his smart investments allowed him to retire early at the age of 53. And so began the next 16 years of Thad and Anna's dream retirement. They threw themselves into remodeling and extending their home on the bay, where it sat overlooking the Florida Ocean. Anna's home was filled on most weekends with one of their 5 children stopping by to visit, and later their visits were even fuller when the grandchildren arrived. She was a part of book clubs and charities, and Thad liked to golf and tinker in the garage on projects that he was in no hurry to finish. But one thing was consistent in their lazy, unplanned days, and that was the pair's morning swim. Unless one of them was down with the sniffles, they didn't even miss their morning exercise even if they had a house full of visitors. Anna was a little cautious of the water. After all, Florida has its share of sharks, and even the occasional alligator that got turned around and ended up at the beach somehow. Thad would have swum out as far into the deep as his arms could carry him, but to keep Anna's fears at bay and to ensure that she'd share the morning swim with him, he agreed to keep their dips to the shallow water around the jetty that was situated right next to the yacht yard where the other neighborhood retirees parked their seagoing vessels. At 7, they took a short 20-minute walk to the jetty from their home, jumped in and did a few laps for 40 minutes before heading home at around 8. They never went farther than a few yards from the shoreline, and the water right near the jetty was only 5 feet deep. They really couldn't have chosen a safer spot to get their morning exercise in. It was about keeping fit after all, not how deep and far they could go. And for 16 years, all was well. Their morning swim was never interrupted by any sign of danger. That's until the year 2000. Like they did every morning, the two walked to the jetty. Anna smiled when Thadius ran ahead and took a spectacular dive into the shallows. Even at 69, he was still quick on his feet and as eager to stay active as he was when they first got married in their 20s. Anna took the less impressive route and got into the water from the little ladder that was attached to the side of the jetty. But that splash was the start of a terrible string of events. Right at the moment that Thad hit the water, a 9-foot, 400-pound tiger shark was skimming the shallows, looking for its morning meal. Pickings had been slim the night before, and it was drawn closer to shore by the smells that the fishermen left behind when they threw the intestines overboard after they cleaned their first catches. Poor Thad just happened to dive in just 2 yards away from where the shark was, and that splash sent it into its instinctual hunting mode. There was a living creature in the water, and as far as it was concerned, a meal was a meal, especially if it jumped practically gift-wrapped right in front of it. Anna's left foot touched the mild water, her eyes still on her husband's back as he swam away in an easy freestyle stroke when the telltale fin sliced through the water toward Thad at breakneck speed. Her eyes went wide, and she started to shout a warning, but it happened so fast that she didn't even get a sound out before the monster reared its open jaws out of the water, bearing down into Thad's left side. Thad was propelled several feet toward the jetty with the force that the animal drove into him. He looked like a rag doll driving through the water. The scene only lasted for a second. Thad was driven down below the surface, and then the shark's razor teeth ripped through him completely, taking his entire left abdomen, liver, and shards of Thad's ribcage in one single bite. Thad floated to the surface already unconscious. It came so fast and so hard that he didn't get a chance to compute exactly what was happening. All he felt was the immense hit and the pressure in his side and the mouthful of salt water that he swallowed. The bite was so massive that it dumped more than half of his life's blood into the sea before Thad's head bobbed up again. The massive mouth made an almost perfect half-moon shape from Thad's armpit right down to his hip. It tore through flesh and bone like it was nothing. One clean bite, and Thad's left abdomen was taken clean out. Whatever was left inside the cavity spilled out into the surf. Anna was out before Thad's dark head reappeared back up to the surface, running along the jetty, screaming for help. In seconds, other morning swimmers, yacht owners, and fishermen were at the scene. An older man grabbed Anna, holding her shaking body close to his, while a crowd of 8 people stormed to the jetty. When they got there, the shark had turned tail and was heading right back to the limp and pale body that was floating on the surface in a pool of red. Without hesitation, they all simultaneously jumped in, screaming and slapping the surface as they drew closer to Thad. Had Anna gone in after her husband, it's almost certain that she would have been targeted next. But 8 men weren't as easy a target as one lone woman. The animal wasn't an idiot. Whatever the pale creatures were, there were far too many of them storming at it for it to take the chance to have one last bite. It fled to the deep before any of the men could identify the species. They hauled the bleeding man onto the platform. The others that didn't jump in after Thad were already on the line with 911. But the situation became starkly clear when they laid Thad out on the jetty. There was no way that an ambulance would arrive in time. Thad's eyes were rolled in the back of his head. His breathing was shallow and gargled, and from the gaping hole on his side spilled what little was left of his intestines. It looked like his side had been scooped neatly out by a jagged spoon. But they tried to contain his organs and the blood as best they could, no matter how dire the reality was. They didn't jump into the ocean risking their lives to save Thad just so they could give up now. Thad gave one last labored breath and died less than a minute after they'd pulled him out of the sea. Still, they held on, putting pressure on the gaping wound, hoping for a miracle. 15 minutes later, the ambulance arrived, but they only had to pick up the already cooling remains of Thaddeus. The man who held Anna pressed her face into his chest, whispering in her ear that she shouldn't look, as the EMTs carried the broken and shredded corpse of her husband past them. This man, a stranger just a few minutes ago, took Anna to the hospital in his own car and asked about her children and their contact details as they drove. Anna was in such a state that she could barely string 2 words together without bursting into tears, but it was enough to give him what he needed to find at least some of her children. While Anna was treated for shock, he managed to locate 2 of her sons based on the information she'd given him, and he stayed with her until they arrived in the early hours of the next day. That man, also a retiree, happened to live just a block away from the Kubinski residence, and as gruesome as the circumstances were, it was what led him and his own wife to befriend the family. If it weren't for the couple, Anna would have never survived that first year after being widowed in such a brutal and visceral way. Her children and grandchildren visited more often than they normally would have, preferring to keep Anna as occupied as possible with those that were still living. But on the occasion when they couldn't, Anna's new friends were there to pick up the reins. But even with all of the support rallied around her, it took Anna years before the nightmares left her. She described the whole event like a scene out of Jaws, and the image of her beloved Thad being torn to pieces right in front of her never really left her, even though the nightmares eventually faded away. Anna did say she was thankful that the beast at least left Thad's face intact, so that she could see him one last time in the pathologist's cold rooms. His body was covered up to his neck in a white sheet, so that she couldn't see the horrific gaping wound on his side. But at least she got one last look at the love of her life before saying goodbye to him forever after his terrifying final affliction.